Hello and welcome to our presentation today. Thank you very much for joining us for this UIA talk on working, consulting, and meeting remotely for lawyers. My name is Grant Davis-Denny, and I'm one of the presenters for today. Look forward to taking your questions at the end of the presentation, and thank you all again for joining us. We hope you all are doing well. Sorry, go ahead, Jose.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to present myself I'm Jose Antonio Perez. I will be presenting together with Grant. I'm based in Barcelona, so it's good to see that we have many people attending this seminar. And again, as Grant, I hope you're all fine in the circumstances.
Great. And I'm a partner at a law firm in Los Angeles called Munger, Tolles & Olson. I'm a co-chair of my firm's IT committee. We're a firm of about 200 lawyers based in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C. My own practice focuses on data security and privacy, antitrust, and complex general business litigation.
All right, on my side, I run a very small boutique law firm based in Barcelona, devoted to real estate practice. And this, in fact, we don't have a technology practice, but what's maybe characteristic about us is that we really do use a lot of virtual technology in our firm. So that maybe that's the reason why I'm here, I presume.
Well, it should be fairly obvious why we're hosting a webinar on remote work at this time. Our number one concern, of course, is with everyone's health and safety, and we hope that you and your families are doing well, given the circumstances. Clients, of course, also need ongoing representation during this period of time when we're all confined to our homes. On top of that, lawyers have various duties of competence and confidentiality that apply to our use of remote work tools. Our point with this presentation, of course, is not that you should necessarily prefer remote work to in-office work or in-person meetings, but that there are ways to narrow the gap between being remote and being together. I'll add that we're going to offer suggestions for lawyers at both large firms and small firms. Many of our tips are focused on choosing software that can make your remote practice more effective. In offering those tips, we do recognize that for those of you who may be affiliated with larger firms, this may not be your choice to make. Your firm may tell you what software you can and cannot use. So we're going to also include some tips along the way on how to make use of these types of software and hardware tools most effectively.
All right, Colette, I would need your help to move the slides, I believe, again. Yeah. Let's get to the preview. Okay, yep. Well, this as you can see is the structure of our call of our video conference. We'll start with some reminders we might already know. We will deal with how working remote can happen. Video conference tools, storage tools, office packages, and then legal aspects connected with all of those. If we start with the following one, with the IT security reminders. Let's see, Colette, I need your help again to move this. Well, just first of all, let me just give you some briefing, some instructions on how to use this tool. You'll see, you're all connected. You see a panel on the right side of your screen. There's many buttons and many things you can do. The most important ones, I would say, are to see that there's a bar that talks about questions. Here you can actually write while we're talking. You can write the questions you might have for all of us on the go, and we'll try to answer them at the end of the call. So that's how we're going to work. The other buttons, I mean, they're nice to see, particularly if you want to exit the webinar, or display full screen, but it's not something that you will require during our talk.
And before we go much further, I remembered that we're supposed to run a poll here, I believe, at the beginning of the presentation. So yeah, we'll turn it over to our assistant, Colette, to run the poll.
You know, we need you to vote, and there you have a voting poll, I mean, voting button in the panel you can use for this. Looks like everybody's very used to voting. And to polling tools.
Okay.
Yes, all right. So we have
closed the voting. I will show you now the results.
Yes. So it looks like pretty much everybody would see a seminar useful, a webinar useful on legal matters, and as long as preferably it does not last more than 1-2 hours, which is actually it's actually consistent with all the answers we're getting in the French webinar, in the webinar made in French and in the webinar made in Spanish. Well, nice to know. We'll take that into account.
Well, before we jump into some tips on how to make your remote work practice more effective, we did want to give you just a few IT security reminders. Colette, if you could please switch to the next slide. I should say these tips really apply regardless of whether you're working remotely or in your office, but they're particularly important right now because hackers are focused on the new opportunities that they have to exploit with more of us working from home. So let me just walk through a few data security concepts that I hope everyone is already familiar with. One is be on the lookout for phishing emails. These are really the #1 way that attackers tend to get access to an organization's IT systems, because they just need to find one weak link in the organization, someone who is willing to click on a link or an attachment and download malware. So check the email addresses very carefully of those who are sending you emails to make sure they match up with the email addresses that you're expecting. Look out for signs of poor grammar or poor spelling. That can oftentimes be a sign of a phishing email. Of course, always be cautious when opening up attachments. Attachments can lead to malware being downloaded onto your system and onto your law firm's network. Never, ever click on a link and go to a place where you input your password or personal code. It is always much better to type in the website address that you want to visit and then enter your password there. If you click on a link, you may be going to a hacker's website that they control, and you may be giving them your password that they can then use to try and break into your system or to access other accounts that you own. To protect further against phishing emails, we always recommend turning on multi-factor authentication whenever possible. Multi-factor authentication means that not only do you require a password to access the system, but you also might be sent a code on your phone, or you may have a token that you carry around with you. But the idea is to make it much harder for a hacker to gain access to your system merely by stealing your password. Of course, you always want to make sure that your anti-malware software and other software for that matter is kept patched and up to date, because vulnerabilities are constantly being discovered. With passwords, remember to regularly change them and do not use the same password across multiple sites. Hackers know that people do this, and so when they find a password, they will immediately begin running that username and password against other websites to see if people have been using the same password on multiple websites. Of course, never write a password down on a Post-it note and leave it near your computer. That's an easy way for someone who can gain physical access to your environment to steal your password. And I do recommend using a password manager application or software. Two that I've used and really enjoyed are called mSecure and LastPass. And both are reputable options for managing your passwords, which makes it easier to have strong passwords and to keep different passwords across multiple sites. So setting up a comfortable and efficient home office, in my view, is the foundation of any effective work from home approach. So we wanted to go through a few tips on just how to design your office for comfort and efficiency. One is, I really recommend trying to make your home office feel as much like your work office as you possibly can. Now, this won't always be possible. Sometimes you'll have technology at your work office that is just too expensive to replicate at home. But whenever possible, this is something that I think helps make it feel more comfortable to be working from home. I really recommend that you don't go cheap on things like the desk that you choose or the chair that you choose to work at. This is not the time to be pulling out the fold-up chair that you use when you want to play a game of cards. This is a place where we all spend many hours each day, and it's important that you are comfortable, not in pain, and can adjust yourself to a height that allows you to work efficiently and effectively. You don't want to be hunched over, for example, looking at a keyboard all day. That's a sure recipe for back pain. So invest in a keyboard and mouse tray to put under your desk. Make sure that you, if you can, have a standalone monitor that you can get to the right height, either by using a monitor stand or by using an adjustable arm, which you can purchase off of Amazon and have delivered to your home. I recommend also a number of other pieces of hardware for your home desk. One that we'll come back to is, I think it's really important to have one of these, a headset with a microphone to enable better video conferencing and telephone conferencing through your computer. Investing in a good quality webcam, one with HD support and wide angle support, is also, I think, a good investment. I find it very useful at home to have not only a printer, but a good scanner, so that I can sign documents, fill out hard copy documents, and quickly scan them and send them to clients, to co-counsel, and others. I find it helpful increasingly to put my desk near where my Ethernet outlet is. If you don't know what Ethernet means, that just means the cable that runs from your cable or DSL modem to your computer. It allows you not to have to rely on Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi can work, it can do the trick, but if you can have your computer hooked directly into the wire, it's just one less thing that can go wrong, one less bottleneck in your system, and it provides a little improvement on speed. One final tip that I've come across recently is, if your firm has moved to using voice over IP phones, having your voice over IP phone handset at home, I've found makes it feel much more office-like than ever before. So consider trying that out as well.
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, we have a voice over IP in a firm, and having a handset, it makes it more comfortable rather than just picking up the phone at the PC, actually, at your computer. So as regards remote internet connections, we're here going to tell you a little bit how your office will be supposed to actually connect to your law firm from home. But the first thing, and continuing with the tips, the first thing, I mean, you really need speed here. I mean, you're supposed to be working online. You're supposed to have video conferences as the one we're having, and this moves a lot of data through the network. So you really need to check you have a convenient bandwidth. You can do, of course, a speed tests to check that. And here's a website where you can do so. Right. Ideally, and Grant was mentioning that already. I mean, Ethernet connection is ideal. I mean, Ethernet connection is much faster than Wi-Fi. So this is why having your desk next to your Ethernet connection is more than convenient. Wi-Fi is, well, mostly, I mean, we all have Wi-Fi generally. It can go fast, but there can be some points in your at home where connection is really not not good. So you might need to consider to install systems that either replicate it or that allow or actually know where to hold your conference call and your video conferences. Where in your home, maybe you have it in your office, maybe in the living room, in the place where there's more connection, but you need to run speed tests to check that. And also there's, I mean, alternatively to this, there's the cellular hotspots. I mean, in Spain, we're not that used to using hotspots, but it's true that there might be operators that offer internet connections in certain places. Here in, I mean, I know in Germany, T1 does that. And if it's a nice alternative if actually your service is disabled, or if you happen not to have a strong connection, you should simply take into account that it will not always be as reliable as yours generally. And if we go to how, I mean, if we move to the next slide, these are mainly the ways you can actually connect from home with your computer to your office, right? See, there's many of them. Mostly will not be your choice, but it will be your IT manager choice, which means that normally your IT support should know how things are configured. Just to give a basic explanation of each, you have a remote desktop protocol. That's when you actually have your physical computer, your work computer at the office, and you have another computer at home, and you're simply trying to connect from one computer to another using a connection protocol, which means that generally your computer, your work computer is physical, is still at the office, it's open and running, and you can access to it from home. This is generally, I mean, my experience with that in the past is that it's generally slow, not necessarily safe, and it does, and connection generally can break a little, and you might need to restore it. But that's my personal experience with that. Following one, I mean, your law firm might probably have set up a virtual private network, which is a nice security layer that will allow you access to your resources. Here, generally, you can have your own computer at home and simply access to resources in a server through a specifically established safe network. That's something you should ask your IT support to confirm whether they have this. My experience with this is that they're safe. They're maybe safer than a remote desktop protocol connection, but they're again slow. Then one thing which I believe, Grant, you know more about than I only tried once here, is desktop virtualization, which actually means that you have a virtual desktop somewhere you can access from anywhere, right?
That's right. So I use VPN and Citrix quite a bit, but for slightly different purposes. So for VPN, as Jose Antonio mentioned, it's really like you're connecting to your office network, except whenever you need to make a connection to the network, either to save a file to your network or open a file from the network, there's a lag there because you're having to send those files back and forth over the public internet, although through an encrypted channel so that it's secure. Citrix is a little different. With Citrix, the experience from the user's point of view is that you would open up a web browser, or sometimes it's a standalone Citrix application window. And then you're sort of seeing a picture of a desktop that's actually being hosted on a server back at your office. I've found with Citrix, there's always a little bit of a lag, a little bit of latency in terms of how quickly it responds to your mouse movements and your typing. But if you need to perform resource-intensive tasks, if you need to be working with large files, processing large amounts of data, offloading that to the server can actually be quite useful and can be quicker than having to download files all the way to your computer, send them back and forth, and have the work being done on your local computer.
All right. And then on my side, I mean, the last one we're referring to is possibly the one I use the most, which is cloud-based software as a service. I mean, my law firm is pretty much depending on that. I mean, we've structured all our software as a service. I mean, we don't have any server locally at our premises. We don't have people coming and install and update constantly our matter management software, or simply put some licenses on board, an Office license in our servers and install them there. We just pay for as a service in using and use cloud software that is actually offered through cloud, and in actually all and every single part of our work cycle. I mean, from opening a matter, we have a software for that. From adding activities, we have a cloud software for that, and this has become fairly usual now. It wasn't that usual in the past, simply because of safety and security. I mean, at the end of the day, you didn't know who was providing the service. Maybe security was not that good, but now this has become more professional in my view, and you have access to service providers who really first they update their services and their software, so you actually always have an updated software at your service. And secondly, they have very much improved their security layers and the safety they provide. I mean, they've become aware that providing safety is not a matter that depends on the user, it depends on them. At the end of the day, they're the ones storing software and storing your access codes and storing your documents.
So if we want to move on to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about video conferencing, which I'm sorry, I skipped one.
Yeah, we skipped one.
In terms of these remote connection options, I mean, I think our view is that there's not going to be one best solution for each and every one of us. Each of us should consider factors, including whether you even have a choice. As we said earlier, if you're a large law firm, the choice of software may be made by others. But also, think about speed and reliability. Cost is obviously a concern and something to think about. The cloud-based options I find tend to be quite a bit cheaper than software options that require you to install software and maintain it on a corporate network and on all your local computers. And consider what gives you the best access to your electronic files wherever they are normally stored, and of course what systems will be secure. I agree with Jose Antonio that while cloud-based software once got a bad rap, there's I think a lot more that's been done in recent years to improve the security of those systems. And if you just think about the resources that an average law firm will have to maintain their IT systems, to maintain security, and compare that to a cloud-based provider of software like a Box or a Microsoft that has literally thousands of employees they can dedicate to IT security. Oftentimes, those cloud-based platforms are going to be more secure than what law firms themselves will be able to offer if they are maintaining the software and the systems themselves. So, we recommend that you have a backup option. None of these approaches are foolproof. VPN goes down from time to time. Citrix sometimes doesn't work. So it's always good to have at least two options for connecting. If you're working out in public, which hopefully you're not having to do much these days, but if you're in a coffee shop or on another public Wi-Fi network, like at an airport, make sure that you are establishing a secure connection to whatever remote service you're using, meaning log into that VPN if you have VPN. Don't just go out and start browsing around on the web without logging into your secure connection, because hackers that are sitting on that same public Wi-Fi network may be able to access the data that you're sending back and forth. As I said earlier, it's really important to have multi-factor authentication on all the services that you possibly can have it on, but particularly on these remote connection services. And the reason is, if you don't have multi-factor authentication turned on and a hacker steals one of your users' usernames and passwords, they can establish a connection to your network or your computer systems from wherever they're at on the globe. So it's important to have multi-factor authentication turned on for all of these remote connection services. I also recommend that businesses consider using software that automatically connects users to systems like VPN systems. That helps to ensure that if a user forgets to do so, that they are not out there browsing around on a public Wi-Fi network without having an encrypted connection to a VPN. And one software package that I'm aware of that provides this service is called Global Protect. Okay, now we can move on to video conferencing. This is obviously a service that all of us are becoming increasingly reliant on, given our need to work from home and our need to continue to communicate with clients, co-counsel, opposing counsel, courts, participate in depositions, participate in court hearings. All of those things are making us increasingly reliant on video conferencing. Unfortunately, I think what we're all finding is that video conferencing is not as simple as just turning on your webcam. There are a number of different video conferencing services that you're going to use, and there are a number of different best practices out there that I think help to improve the quality of your video conferencing meetings. And we're going to walk through some of those tips and possible options. So one thing that I recommend, whoops, I think I went too far, is that you use a headset like this one with a built-in microphone. And the reason is that the microphones and the speakers that are on the average laptop just don't have the same quality that you can get by using a headset with a built-in microphone. You want to take the time, I think, every time to test your headset before you actually enter the conference. As much as I use my headset for video conferencing, I still find that for one reason or another, my computer likes to change the settings on me and have me speaking through my computer or getting audio through my computer speakers rather than through my headset. So it's always good to test those each time. When you're not actively participating in the conference, it's good practice to mute your headset. You just never know when a child is going to come running through the background, or your dog is going to start barking, or something else can happen that will disturb the orderly progression of the conference. In terms of the video image, of course, consider the background behind you. Think about the lighting. You don't want to be in a situation where people can see your dirty dishes or the laundry that you haven't gotten to that week. I also find it helpful. I don't remember to do this every time, but I try and let my household members know that I'm about to join a video call so that they don't go walking behind me or scream for my attention right in the middle of my web conference. The experts on this recommend that you station the camera right at the eye height and try and look into the camera. In other words, you don't want to have the camera over here off to the side and be looking at a screen in front of you, because that will give folks the impression that you're not paying attention, even though you actually may be. This also just comports with our normal understanding that we want to try and have eye contact with everyone to have effective communication. Keep in mind that with video conferencing tools, not only are you able to share video, but you also are able to share your screen. And I think this in particular is a tool that lawyers just don't use enough. It's very powerful. Even when we're in our work offices, we could be doing a better job, I think, of sharing our screens to work on a Word document together, or to show a colleague an interesting article. I think it's just a very effective way to communicate. And so consider using this tool more if you haven't been using it in the past. Jose, Antonio, did you have a point there?
Yeah, I have a point there. I mean, there's a point I make every time in my practice here. I mean, I'm very keen in using screen sharing and even screen control. I mean, you can actually beam the document, have people read it, go through it, make changes. Even if you're working with a colleague and you're actually just building the document together that you're going to produce to your client, you can actually share screen. If there's an idea you don't really grasp and you don't know how to write it down, you can hand over control of the screen to your colleague. The colleague can type in what he means to say. You can recover control and continue editing. So it's really about it's a tool that enables to collaborative working, and it's very very useful. I mean, I used to do it a lot in the past, but it's true that I don't know if it's your experience also, Grant. I mean, you really did to do. I mean, you really had to do a lot of convincing people that this was really the tool. Because it proved that something weird. I mean, it's easier to meet in Madrid or Midway and have a 10 people meeting. Well, maybe not. Maybe it's better that we all connect, see the document, we're all focused, and we don't have to spend 3-4 hours driving or just in a plane.
I totally agree. I totally agree. I think that's a great point. Couple of things to be aware of with screen sharing, just so you don't have an embarrassing thing happen to you. One is you want to be conscious of what else might be appearing on your screen. For example, sometimes we have our email set up so that each time a new email comes in, it pops up on our screen with a little notification. And if an email came in right now from Colette to me saying, "Oh, is Jose Antonio going on again about how great video conferencing is or how great screen sharing is?" That'd be a little embarrassing. So we don't want to have that happen. Try and turn off those notifications. Or another way to address that is most screen sharing programs these days allow you to not share your entire screen, but to share just the particular software application that you want the other users to see. That's a good best practice to follow, I think, so that you don't have to worry about other things popping up on your screen. And then, of course, when you're done, remember to turn off the screen sharing before you go on to write that email to your friend about how miserable your video conference meeting was with others. So. Yeah, one other thing I'll just mention, and this is true of regular in-person meetings, but don't don't try to multitask during a video conference. Others can tell when you're not paying attention, and it really undermines the effectiveness of the meeting for everyone if folks are coming in and out.
Mhm. Absolutely. And here are actually some examples that are possibly widely known and widely used. One of them is Microsoft Teams. These examples have been brought to us by the UIA technical people as actually software that can kind of gives sufficient security and sufficient safety to communications, and also which are broadly known. By using Microsoft Teams, you can do pretty much everything that we just talked about. You can actually set up a video conference. You can just share your screen. You can share your document. You can edit it. You can take control, and you can also link it or synchronize it with your calendar. So it makes it pretty useful. This is, for instance, the one we're using now to hold our internal meetings, and also meetings with clients during confinement, at least in Barcelona, is being very widely used. And then we have other examples. You want to see them, I will need help to move the screen because it seems that my screen moving ability is limited. There's Zoho. The reason why there's WebEx also. WebEx is also widely known. Everybody knows about Cisco. And actually it provides the same capabilities we have been talking about. Generally, experience with WebEx tells that it really needs a big band. So you actually need a very good connection, because otherwise you might lose vision, or you might lose sound at a certain point. But that's only experience. And another example is the one that we just popped, which is Zoho. Zoho is actually here because it's the video conferencing platform that the Belgian bar offers to their or recommends to their lawyers. The lawyers registered in the bar of Belgium, actually, and it's fairly easy to use. At the end of the day, again, there's no good or bad choice, as we said at the very beginning. You just need to try it, test it, and see if it works for you. You might be a Zoho user, but not a Teams user, for instance, or reverse, or the other way around. So please take this as examples of actually products that work in the market, and that you can actually just take by subscription, simply, easily.
Great. Well, let me talk a little bit about Zoom. I've used both Citrix WebEx and Zoom quite a bit, and currently, almost all of the video calls that I organize are done through a Zoom-based platform. I think Zoom is one of the most widely used video conferencing platforms out there right now. On the other hand, it's gotten a lot of bad press recently for some security and privacy concerns. Some of them, I think have some, merit, but I think some of them are also being overblown quite a bit. And I'm happy to discuss with anyone the details of those security and privacy concerns. The bottom line for me, though, is at the end of the day, I don't see Zoom as having significantly more security or privacy issues than other video conferencing applications that are out there right now, for the average user at least. One concern that's gotten a lot of press, and frankly, I've had it happen in a video conference that I was sitting in on, is this phenomenon called Zoom bombing. If you're not familiar with it or you haven't experienced it yourself, I'll share with you my example. We were going to have a public announcement of a litigation settlement that we had entered into, and we wanted to invite community members to come and learn about the terms of the settlement. And the organizer of the conference decided to send the conference, the video conferencing information out via Facebook and via Twitter, which meant that it was out there publicly available for anyone to join. Just as our conference was about ready to begin, some uninvited or unwanted participants joined us and began issuing racial slurs over the audio. They began displaying very troubling images on the computer screen, and ultimately our conference call had to be shut down. So this is a legitimate concern, although it's not specific to Zoom. Any service could have this same sort of attack happen to it if someone were to find the meeting ID and the meeting were not protected by a password. So let's talk about a few steps you can take to avoid this phenomenon called Zoom bombing. Whoops, I'll skip this there. One is, don't ever share your meeting numbers or links publicly. Don't put them on Twitter or Facebook. Hopefully that won't be an issue for most of us in our legal practices. You also want to avoid using easy to guess meeting numbers. For example, some video conferencing systems will default to your normal phone number as the default meeting number. I generally recommend that people not use that because it's too easy for an attacker to guess. Most of these systems also give you options for added security that you may want to consider. You can require that anyone who enters the meeting type in a password. You can have a feature turned on called a waiting room, where participants have to sit in a separate area until you admit them to the meeting, and you can see who's calling in, or and see if it's someone that you expected to be joining the conference. These services also generally allow you to turn off video, audio, or screen sharing for participants. So if it's a large conference call and you're really only going to have one person doing the most of the presenting, you can turn off those services to reduce the risk with Zoom bombing. I think it's a good idea to know how to eject people from the call if anyone turns out to be an attacker. And finally, these services typically will allow you to close the meeting once everyone that you were expecting has arrived in the meeting.
All right, so we move now to storage. I mean, we've actually talked so far about meeting, seeing each other, about actually beaming documents, being able to edit them. But as part of our practice, I mean, we all store documents somewhere, whether in our computer or in our server or elsewhere, and we actually need to send documents. So there's other capabilities and that you can actually still do online, and for which there's software that can help you do them online, which are file storages. You can have a file storage in a service in a cloud-based one. You can actually have a cloud storage service which actually synchronizes with your computer, so you can actually edit your files physically in your computer, and when you just end, the system will automatically synchronize and back it up in the cloud. You can actually use software or apps that enables you to edit online. Simply just connect it to a platform and you're editing the document that isn't really there in your computer. It's stored somewhere else. And also there's software which in our practice we need to use, and maybe we don't use this that much, which is sharing software, which actually helps sharing documents within our firm or with third parties. Yeah, I'm generally very keen. I mean, I know that, I don't know about you, but Grant, but I used to hate those emails with an attachment that weighed maybe 20 megabytes, and that would actually bust my inbox at a certain point, or which you would actually never receive because the sender didn't even know that they had a maximum capacity limitation, that so that they really were not able to send documents with a capacity, with a weight larger than maybe 10 megabytes. So that's something that reality will help us improve. And then another software that we would like to mention at least is I mean, I don't know how many of you are familiar with document management system or have that in place in your firm. You generally find this in big in big law firms or in medium-sized law firms, where actually you have a software which is designed for lawyers, where you're able to open a matter. You have your own matter open as it was your personal paper file, and you can put inside emails and you can put inside your documents relating to that software. So these are matter management or matter-centric document management systems, which is, I mean, it's maybe a more sophisticated option, but we still wanted to mention. If Colette, if you can move to the next slide, please. Let's start with the basics. I mean, the purpose of this, and you will see that we're using the first two examples are fairly basic, but they actually work. I mean, if you're a small law firm, you don't have a super structure so far, and you actually need to start working online. Microsoft has OneDrive, and OneDrive is a nice cloud platform where you can store your documents easily, simply by using your paid subscription to Word. So it's fairly usable. It's fairly safe. So it's something that can work at a low scale level. This can be used not only for sending, I mean, for storing documents, but OneDrive, if we move to the next slide, will actually help you send documents easily, and because it integrates with Outlook, of course. And actually, not this is the part where I say how to avoid sending all these 20 megabytes emails, which is by sending links. This is a much safer way of sending documents, I believe. I mean, at the end of the day, you have your document in a safe cloud. You have hired the cloud storage service, which has a nice security standard protocol. So you feel safer about where your documents are stored. By sending a link, the document is going nowhere. You're simply sending to your recipient, who might be your colleague or your client, a link so that they can actually download the document from the place it's stored currently. So actually the document travels nowhere. It doesn't travel to the network. There's only a link he can access to download it. So it's a pretty much, I would say, a pretty safer way of sending things. And of course, it's a pretty nicer way to send large attachments than, because a link would weight maybe 1 kilobyte, not many megabytes.
And I've used OneDrive quite a bit and continue to use it. I think it's a great system. Just so you know, there are some other options out there. I've also used Box quite a bit for sharing files with co-counsel who are outside of my firm. We, by the way, have a document management system. And so typically I will use the document management system to share documents with others within my law firm. But when I need to share documents on a regular basis with co-counsel, for example, that may work at other law firms, I'll use Box or OneDrive to do that. There's a product out there called Excellion that I have also used that I think is particularly well suited for one-time large file transfers. So let's say you want to share a large file with opposing counsel, but you don't want to have a shared folder where they will have perpetual access to your shared resources. Excellion can be a nice solution for that because it will automatically cause a folder to expire after a certain period of time. There are other cloud-based options out there for storage and document transfer, like Dropbox and the iCloud. In the United States, I would generally say that these services are viewed within the legal community as being more oriented towards consumers and less oriented towards business users and enterprise users. So it's not to say that you can't use these services for your work purposes, but in my experience, they're not used nearly as frequently as OneDrive and Box for these purposes within law firms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you, Grant. I mean, at the end of the day, we see Box, we see OneDrive, and the rest of the options are generally for consumers rather than professionals. It's pretty much the same with this WeTransfer file exchange, which at least has become popular in Europe because it allows to send. I mean, it's a platform that simply allows you to send large documents. So people have used it to share pictures, family movies between them, which are maybe weight 200 megabytes. So they're actually too large to be sent in any other way. And it has become fairly popular, and some firms have actually started using it to send documents or quite a big number of documents to their clients or to their colleagues. It operates the same way as others. I mean, it just creates a link which will expire at a certain time, and it has no feature other than if you actually are alone or have not thought about having a virtual office and you need to urgently set it up, having OneDrive, Teams, and WeTransfer covers pretty much a lot of it. If it's not the case because you already have this, maybe it's a nice to know app, which also offers a paid subscription and a professional subscription.
So Jose Antonio, I thought, did a wonderful job of talking about document management systems, and I don't have a whole lot to add other than that you should just understand that compared to setting up a new account on OneDrive or Box, setting up a document management system is an involved process that will require significant help from an information technology specialist. And so if you're looking for a solution that will get you through the next few weeks or months, however long we're working from home, you're probably going to find that OneDrive or a Box is going to be an easier setup than using a document management system like NetDocuments or iManage FileSite, both of which are great options for document management systems, and document management systems definitely have their advantages, but they do take more time to set up and are more costly to set up than a cloud-based file storage and sharing system like OneDrive or Box.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, because we have other options such as NetDocuments or iManage, which, I mean, if you think in the long run, if you actually realize that you want to take your time now to build the appropriate solution for the future, then you really need to think about a document management system. I mean, to give you an example, in our firm, we use NetDocuments. We thought it was the best option we could actually have at hand. Simply because also, I mean, if being a small law firm is not of help for these situations, I'll explain you why. I mean, many of these platforms really have a minimum of 50 to 100 licenses. So they actually require that if you want to hire their services, you must have a minimum of 100 users, which we actually don't have. So it was actually painful to us to find, knowing of the need to have a document management system, a sound one, which enabled to properly store our documents and our emails associated to our matters. It proved kind of hard to find one which would fit our small size. And we actually found NetDocuments, which to me is one of the main players in this market, together with iManage.
I agree.
All right, and then we move to Office software packages. If you can help me move the slide, would be great. I mean, this is just a small reminder that we've been talking about apps and software and programs separately. We've talked about video conference on the one side, about storage software on the other side, and maybe we haven't given the view or the image that you can either choose to purchase many apps and work with all of them, a video conferencing application which is different to your um, storage application, or you might find packages in the market that do actually offer all in one. Right? The advantage generally of this is that it might be easier to manage and it might be less costly, as it says here. And of course, they integrate all between each other. Which means that, I mean, you're using a single package. If we move to the next slide, you'll see that Office offers a package which includes Teams as video conferencing. It actually includes Word to edit. It actually includes OneDrive to store your documents. It actually includes a task planner, also so you can do collective tasking with your teams. It actually includes a system that enables you to edit and do some versioning in your documents, and it's just one paid subscription. If you actually decide to do some cherry picking, of course, you might end up with 5 nice softwares which might not understand each other or might not be used to working together because they're not integrated. And this is the Belgian commitment that, as you can see, there's also Zoho, which offers the same thing. At the end of the day, there's many companies which do actually provide this kind of service.
Great. So, when you use one of these remote services, be it WebEx or Zoom or OneDrive or Box, to perform your legal work, as an attorney, at least in the United States, I can tell you that the bar associations have been quite clear that lawyers have duties before they start using these services. They have duties to ensure that the service that they're using has a reasonable level of security, and that you take reasonable steps to address any risks that are associated with using these services. The bar associations have been very clear that, generally speaking, using cloud-based software is not, unlawful. It's not a violation of your ethical duties, but you do need to understand whether these services have appropriate protections in place to protect your client data. And then you need to take steps to ensure that the service providers will live up to their commitments. And we'll talk about both of those issues very briefly. In terms of thinking about the types of data that we need to protect, I put it into 2 categories. One is personal information, which in the EU and in California and in other jurisdictions around the world basically means any data that relates to an identifiable natural person. There's a couple of exceptions, but the definition is very broad. And we have duties under the EU's GDPR if we're working with data about European citizens, or under California's Consumer Privacy Act if you're working with data about California citizens, to protect that data, to make sure that it's subject to reasonable protections, and to make sure also that whoever you're sharing it with is using it for a proper purpose, that they're not then distributing it to others, or selling it, or sharing it with others, or using it for some purpose other than what you intended them to use it for when you shared it with them. We also pay attention to personal information data, because if you have a breach, it can result in regulatory investigations. It can result in class action lawsuits. You may have to provide notice to consumers that you were subjected to a data breach. So all of those are important legal duties that we have, but we also have ethical duties as lawyers, right? We have the duty to protect our clients' secrets or their confidential information. And the bodies here in the United States have said that when it comes to protecting confidential information, that applies as well to our use of cloud-based software or our use of remote work tools. We have a duty of competence to not be experts in those tools, but to have a basic understanding of their security features and how they protect data. And I think there's essentially a couple of things that you need to do as a lawyer when it comes to working with vendors who will be handling your client's data. One is you need to conduct a basic level of due diligence on the vendors that will process the personal data or the client confidential data. And again, assure yourself that they have an adequate level of data security. One of the ways to do this is you look at their reputation. Is this a provider that others in the legal world frequently use? And if so, that should give you some confidence that they will reliably protect your data. You can also take and should take a close look at the provider's terms of service. What those terms of service, their privacy policies, they oftentimes will describe how the service provider is going to be using the data that you give to them and what responsibilities they take for protecting the confidentiality of data. I understand that not all of us are as comfortable with technology or data security issues as others, and the ethics authorities recognize that as well. And so they say, if you don't feel like this is something you can do, it's okay to involve a technology specialist, to hire a technology consultant who can come in and help you evaluate the cloud-based service provider or the provider of communication software that you might use for video conferencing to ensure that they have an adequate level of security. You also need to ensure that for any business that you're working with who's going to be using the confidential data of your clients, be it for video conferencing or file storage, that they have a data processing agreement in place with you. And basically what a data processing agreement does is it requires the vendor to maintain certain protections over the data to ensure that they don't use or share it for purposes other than what you had intended when you provided them the data to help you represent your client. Finally, for lawyers located in Europe or who are working with European clients, consider whether there are any cross-border data transfer issues that you may have to deal with. For example, in Europe, there are restrictions on the ability to send data about European consumers to countries that do not have adequate levels of privacy or security protections. Sometimes those issues can be dealt with through contractual clauses that require the vendor to maintain adequate privacy or security protections. But you want to make sure that if you're subject to one of those cross-border data transfer regulations, that you're not using a service that will send your client's data or the personal information of consumers that you may have to a country that doesn't have adequate data protection regulations. Jose Antonio, I think the audio has.
Yeah, I believe I was muted. That's one thing that happens a lot in video conferencing. You forget that you muted yourself. So that
was just a teaching moment. We did that to help everyone be aware of that.
So yeah, I believe that was actually all we had to say. Now let's see if you have anything to say or ask on your side. I mean, on the control panel, I do not see any written questions. Colette, I don't know if it's me or it's simply that that there's none. If somebody wants to raise a question, just please write it to the in the control panel. Otherwise, we're happy that you remained all the time listening to us.
I don't see any question. Just Mateus raised his hand. Mateus, if you have a question, you can write your question in the chat or in the question section.
Just
Okay.
playing good. Which is good, actually. It's the way to go. All right.
I see another question.
Yes.
Yes. What is the best program to meet and go live streaming? And I think this is, if I understand correctly, the question is about what is the best program for video conferencing. My own view is that there are several reliable, reputable video conferencing services out there. I have a hard time, from my own perspective, distinguishing among them in terms of what is really the best one. Among those that I think are reputable and widely used in the legal community would be Zoom, Citrix, WebEx, and Microsoft Teams, or it used to be known as Microsoft Skype for Business. I've used all of those and have found them to be basically have the same features from the user's perspective. All of them have good video conferencing and screen sharing and screen controlling capabilities, and I've found that all of them work well.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Right.
Another question from Clarence Fu.
Hi, Clarence. So Clarence says, are video conference meetings effective if I still need to get the wet ink signed security documents from clients? Yeah, nice, great. I believe we haven't talked much about signing documents online, right? I mean, in Spain, it has become a little popular and unpopular, I would say. I mean, we all like signing documents online, but nobody in Spain would still trust as an online signed document, such as, for instance, there's the software such as DocuSign or SignatureIt, which make things easy, but you cannot produce that document to a court and say it's a signed document. And it's easy maybe for a non-legal document or document without legal effect. Even during this crisis, there's been new legislation trying to help, which actually hasn't helped, which has provided that notaries are enabled to do video conferencing, hold general meetings of companies through video conferencing, but they're responsible for checking the identity. So notaries have all decided not to do any video conferencing. So that's what has happened here, at least. So I find it's a good question. I mean, we might have video conferencing useful to get the document ready, but maybe not to sign it. I mean, it's nice to share screens. We will be able to use Microsoft Teams to finalize the document together. But when it comes to sign it, at least in Spain, we don't have that software capability. We have nice apps, but none of them would be acknowledged before a court.
Interesting. I think the United States has generally moved towards being more accepting over the last several years of electronic signatures, and I think like what you're talking about in Spain during the COVID-19 stay-at-home period, we're also seeing some attempts made at adjusting signature requirements to make it easier for people to do these online. I will say, by the way, that having your own electronic signature that looks exactly like your handwritten signature and adding it in Adobe Acrobat to documents turns out to be a very easy thing to do. I waited myself too long to get that set up, but essentially all you need to do is sign your name on a normal piece of paper, scan it in, save it as a JPEG file, a .jpg file, and then in Acrobat, when you go to the tools area, there's an option to fill and sign. And when you select sign, there will be an option to choose an image file. You just go and choose your signature image file, and Acrobat will remember that for the future, so that the next time you want to sign a PDF document, you just go and click the fill and sign, and then your signature, you'll be allowed to place it wherever on the document that you want. So I find that's a really sped up my ability to sign off on documents that require a signature.
Thank you. And another question from Robert Earth. What is your experience of virtual court hearings?
I have not yet participated in a virtual court hearing or one of the remote depositions. They are, again, becoming increasingly common here in the United States, particularly depositions. We're seeing conducted a lot more with everyone in their own remote spaces, including the court reporter, the videographer, and of course the witness and the counsel who are questioning the witness and defending the witness. I think those services are fairly mature in terms of their capabilities and reliability, but there are, the inherent limitations you have of having people connect from their home networks. And one of the things we've seen here in the United States is that as more and more of us are working from home, the networks, the cable modem networks, for example, that go into particular neighborhoods are starting to get overloaded. And so while we may pay for a really high bandwidth, there may be limitations on the bandwidth that we can actually get in practice because of the number of us that are connecting to services. And the reason I mention all of that is it has made me somewhat nervous about the ability of everyone to reliably participate in a remote deposition or remote court hearing, where you really need to have virtual certainty that everything will go off without a hitch. And for me, that's given me some pause and concern about participating in these virtual depositions or having to participate in a virtual court hearing. That said, we may have circumstances where it's just not our choice and where we need to do our best to make it work. Jose Antonio, I don't know if you've had to do any court hearings or anything similar since we've been in the lockdown situation.
I'm not a litigator myself, but in Spain it's not possible yet to do court hearings online, unfortunately. So courts are pretty much locked now, except for urgent matters, and still done the traditional way.
Got it. Yeah, here in the United States, we have definitely had a number of courts start moving to having video conferenced hearings. I just haven't myself participated in one yet.
Thank you. Other questions from Clarence, who said, I wonder if fellow participants would witness a will signing by video conferencing.
Yeah, would the witness a will signing by video conferencing? I personally, I would say no, actually, at least in taking into account the current capabilities. I mean, just to go back to the example I mentioned, I mean, there was new legislation enabling notaries to actually do online work, which means holding and notaries is fairly important position in Spain. So it's actually a high public servant who actually gives oath and faith of what's being said, and also authorizes and gives a full proof of the validity of documents that are signed before him. So he has actually a big responsibility in our system. So and if the new legislation enables to hold general assemblies of shareholders through video conferencing, but it leaves to the notary the mean and how he will attest that people were who they really were and said who they really and were who they really said they were. Of course, notaries decided never to sign. At the time, there's and I would say that if there's a possibility to really attest identity online, and this is a technical possibility, at the point there will be no problem. But if you are asking here in Spain currently, I don't think that there's such a technology.
There's a couple of other comments and questions in the question area that I thought would be worth sharing. Robert Hurst says that all interlocutory hearings in the London Business Court are currently being conducted very efficiently by Skype and over phone. Before the hearing, the judge and parties' attorneys receive electronic bundles, but he notes that he thinks it would be inappropriate for trials. So that's an interesting comment. Katia Gracia notes, we are experiencing hearings with telematic platforms. Do you think it may be the future? Telematic is a new term for me. I'm not sure if that means video conferencing, but if it does, I do think we're going to start to see greater use of video conferencing in the future. I think people are potentially going to recognize that they are good enough replacements that saving clients the cost of flying lawyers across the country to attend a meeting or a deposition may be worth the slightly lower quality of having a video conference compared to an in-person meeting. And as Jose Antonio, I think, correctly pointed out, there may even be times where, with screen sharing, where it works better to have a video conference than to have an in-person meeting. And I think because lawyers are, in a sense, going to be forced to use these tools more and more over the next several weeks and potentially months, they will start to understand the advantages and grow more comfortable with using these technologies.
Yeah, there's another question just checking whether I was muted or not. There's another question which actually deals with KYC, and we haven't actually talked much about that, but it says, because of know your client requirements, would you include in your practice that you meet client in person at least once before continuing all future meetings by video conferencing? Well, of course, it depends on the kind of client. Maybe if you're talking to corporations, it's not always easy to get to know the ultimate beneficial owners of the client, and therefore make a nice KYC. If you're meeting, you have a physical, a natural, an individual who is actually your client, I mean, in Spain, at least, as long as you get sufficient information about him, you're not required to meet him in person. I would like to highlight though, that there's actually lots of software now going on for lawyers and for corporations that would actually help you to meet your KYC requirements. And you can actually, I mean, I believe these are called third-party risk managers, where you have actually some companies that deliver cloud services, or that you can actually ask them to run a check on your client. One of them, it comes to my mind, is Navex. So if you hire their services, it's a subscription, you can actually get them to perform this kind of checks for you, which is always a nice thing to supplement your regular KYC maybe requirements.
Well, Alexander Sazdov has an interesting question. He says, does the external cloud platform protect enough the client's confidential information, considering that the administrators of the cloud platform will always have access to the files? And it's a good question. I think let me say up front that there is no perfectly secure system, right? We don't have, and we never will have, a system that can guarantee 100% security. So we're always looking at a risk-benefit type of analysis. And I think it's important when you look at cloud platforms to, of course, consider what security measures and controls they have in place, but also to consider what the next best alternative would be. And typically, the next best alternative to a cloud platform will be what we call an on-premises system. So a server that's hosted in your law firm's environment, potentially in the firm itself, physically in the firm, or maybe at an off-site location. But even when you have that type of setup, you're going to have administrators who will have access to the systems and the files so that they can keep them patched and configured and up to date and help people with troubleshooting and all of that. So in a sense, there's no way to fully get around the problem of having some administrators have access to files. And so what you want to do is ensure that the cloud-based provider is vetting the employees that they're hiring, is running them through standard background and security checks. It's also helpful if the software provider has what we call compensating controls in place, and that can mean different things depending upon what the security issue is. But in the case of being worried about a bad actor being employed by the cloud platform, you would hope that the cloud platform would have measures in place to check how their administrators are using privileged credentials that limit access to areas of the system that the administrators really need access to perform their job functions. And you would hope that the reputable cloud software providers would have such controls in place. And to help ensure that, you want to make sure that you have data processing agreements signed with the cloud service provider that requires them to maintain reasonable security controls.
All right, we have a comment from Ashwell, which actually says that the courts in India are holding video conference for extremely urgent matters, and they're currently using Zoom, but considering using other app, considering the privacy issues with Zoom, which is nice to know, at least that what happens in India. Thanks, Ashwell, for sharing that. And there's a nice thank you from Katia. Thank you. I believe that there's no more questions so far. So we're actually happy that we kind of like caught your interest, and I hope that this was useful to all of you who attended in this particular situations.
I agree, and thank you all for participating. If you have questions that come to mind after we wrap up today's session, please don't hesitate to reach out to either one or both of us. I'm sure we would be glad to answer your questions via email or even to jump on a call and talk through any issues or questions you may have.
All right, well, thanks to you, and hope to see you in, maybe not see you, but have another webinar with you. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Bye.